Hello, everyone. A couple weeks ago, there was a Twitter meme going around of 5 things you could talk about with zero prep, and I successfully talked myself into Triple Triad and Final Fantasy VIII. So we're going to talk about that. I am, of course, that's the worst P of my life. I am, of course, Professor Orpheus Kinsui. You can call me Orpheus. You can call me Professor. You can call me Mr. Kinsui. You can call me Pog. Don't call me fat ass white girl, and don't call me Shirley. Now, we're going to use, of course, the teacher's best friend, CMS Paint, and we're going to talk about Triple Triad for about 30 minutes. So let's start by opening this can of seltzer water that I have off screen. Perfect. And then let's ask the question, what even is Triple Triad? So Triple Triad is a card game in Final Fantasy VIII that takes place on a 3x3 board. So you have a board that looks a lot like a tic-tac-toe board, and you would be forgiven for thinking that's what I'm drawing right now if you don't have the context. And you're also going to have a set of square cards. You have up to 5 in your hand at any given time. Let me rephrase that. You have up to 5 in your hand when the match starts, and you can play up to 5 of them, depending if you go first or not. But you're gonna have a little card that looks like this, and they're gonna have numbers on it, say 4, 8, 2, and 1. Just put some stats on that. So when the game starts, each player will have 5 cards in their hand. They'll look something like this. Maybe you have a 3, 5, 3, 5. Maybe you have a, I don't know, a 6, 2, 6, 6, stuff like that. So what happens is each player is going to take turns putting cards down on the board, and those cards turn their color, the red and blue, when they go hit the board. So maybe this card is pretty good in, we're going to save that card. Maybe we think, this card's a pretty strong starting move. It can go here, right? And then we're going to have like 6 to 6, 6. And that's, those are pretty above average values. The average value would be something like a 5 in theory. And then our opponent will play a card. Maybe they have a really good card like 9. I don't know. Let's actually give it a lower value to demonstrate like how this might work. Maybe they have like a 9, 3, 9 because they're greedy. 2, something like that. And they decide they're going to play that card here. So what would then happen is they would have their 9, 3, 9, 2. This 9 is bigger than this 6, so that would compare. It's only a comparison when you put the card down. So if they played, say, this card with the 3 on the bottom, they would not convert our card. And we would not convert theirs. But because they played this card with that 9 on the bottom, that is, fun fact, 9 bigger than 6. So that's going to flip our card. So now they have 2 cards on the board, technically. They have this one, and they have this one. All right, we're all cool with that. Then maybe we're like, okay, I want our card back. So we're going to play this 3-5-3-1, and maybe this is the exact situation I'd set up when I designed this terrible card and terrible play of theirs. We're going to say 3-5-3 goes here, right? And that'll flip both this card, and I believe that would flip this card as well. So we would chain back into having all 3 cards on the board with maybe a weak position here. And that's terrible for us, but, c'est la vie. Triple Triad is kind of weird in how you draw your first hand, because it depends on regional rules, but let's ignore that for a second. So with the base game rules, the rules that you start out with, that the rules can change, we'll talk about that. With the base game rules, you have access to your whole heckin' collection, like all 7 billion cards, and you get to pick any 5 of them that you want out of that collection. That's an exclamation point. You get to pick any 5 of them that you want. And generally what you're going to be doing for most of the early part of the game before the rules change is picking your strongest cards, whatever those are. So like I remember Leon and Cypher are both some combination of 4, 6, 9, A, I think it is. And then Cypher's the other way around, so his would be A, 964, something like that. So those are pretty good cards, especially in corners. Maybe you'll take both of those. You'll take I don't know, whatever you're looking to play, whatever your strongest cards are. Maybe one of them. There's a card in the game that looks like this. It's like a 3/3, and A is just 10. It's 10. It's better than 9. But for most people, you're going to walk up to them and you're going to take 5 cards out of your deck and challenge them to a game of Triple Triad. Generally speaking, then you would take one of their cards when you win, or they'll take one of the cards from your hand when you lose. So there's a fair amount of saves coming involved here that the developers did not seem to anticipate. And some people will only have their cards out if they can also take one of yours, or if you have one of your cards up for ante. So I believe it's Renoa's dad who only has the Renoa card if you currently have Cypher in your hand. That sounds right. I'm not looking at this up, by the way. The only 2 programs I have open, well, 3 programs I have open are Paint, VTube Studio, and OBS. But let's take a sip of seltzer and then keep going. So you might be thinking to yourself, Orpheus, that sounds like a mildly fun distraction in the epic RPG that is Final Fantasy VIII, and you're mostly right. But there are some consequences to these actions. One of them is, PlayStation controller only has 4 buttons on the face, and Square dedicated a whole fucking button to challenge people to play cards. It is the same order of importance as opening the menu, talking, and not running, walking. They dedicated a whole fucking button to this. So you can walk up to anyone in the world and press the square button and challenge them to a card game. You can do this at completely inappropriate times. Like, a school is being bombed by child soldiers from another school, and you can challenge people to card games for some reason. I don't know why they did this, but almost everyone in the world is a card game opponent. And there are also like specific people in the world who are like card game royalty. But Final Fantasy VIII's wild. Go play it. But they dedicate a whole button to this, and that means things. Let's talk about menu hierarchies for a second. So when you're designing an RPG that you're going to go through menus a lot, you need to communicate to your player what's important. So from memory, Final Fantasy VIII's menu looks something like this, where you have like, there's like character info, items. There's going to be junction. I think it's actually 4th, but this is the equip, more or less. Final Fantasy VIII doesn't have equipment exactly. Not in the menuing way, anyway. Then you're also going to have like magic and GF, which is Guardian Force. And then I think there's like cards is kind of toward the bottom, but that's your card collection. So the developers should be communicating this to you in a way that's like this is the most important thing, and they want good developers will put the things you're doing the most near the top. So like a good game, Persona 5, has the social link menu. So you have your main menu, right, which is slanted because Persona 5 is cool, and social links is like 3rd. They're called confidence in 5, but whatever. I'm using a mouse for this, by the way. So you're not going to check it that often, but you do want to check it. But it's less important than say, wait, actually, hold on. It's less important than say what your current persona is. It's less important than maybe checking what your items are. You don't change equipment that often in Persona 5 either. I think equipment's actually below confidence. I'd have to double check. But anyway, so for a good game, the developers have a pretty good idea of what things you're going to be accessing in the menu and where and in what order. And this also applies to like face button actions. You are going to have things like Dark Souls kind of overturned this, but like let's think about a PS one. Fuck, this game's old. Controller for a minute, where we have our face buttons, and this is an X, by the way, not a cross. This is a legitimate gaming channel. Basically, until Dark Souls came along and ruined this for action RPGs, you would expect all the most important and common actions to be on the face. It turns out that the triggers are really easy to hit for some common actions, like swinging a sword, but I digress on that. Final Fantasy VIII is pre-Dark Souls and pre-Demon Souls, but not. No, it's pre-Kingsfield, I think. Anyway, so what the developers put on the face and what they do says a lot about what they're going to do with their game. And as we already said, Final Fantasy VIII has something like menu, talk, contextual action. It's usually you would usually use it to stop running because you run by default in Final Fantasy VIII. And then you have it's time to duel for whatever reason. But that also means that they can't do things like, let's think about, I don't know, Kingdom Hearts for a second. You can't have complex contextual actions pop up on the controller that use the square button. That whole button is dedicated to card games. There's a couple other things going on in Final Fantasy VIII as well, which you probably asked yourself this question already, but how do you even get the fucking cards, Orpheus? Well, I'm glad you asked, Orpheus. There is a kid in the starting area, which will be represented by the smiley face, who will give you your starter deck. It sucks. It is literally good enough to beat some students in Balam Garden, but unless you're willing to grind on those students, and by the way, we'll get to why you might want to do that, you're going to get most of your cards from wild encounters. So also, you know what, let's bring my smiley face back. This is the starter area. Also outside the starter area is this path toward a beach, and then there's a nice forest. Those are terrible trees. There's a nice forest that looks like a chicken foot. That's fine. There's a nice forest over here, and then there's your first little dungeon over here, and that's where Ifrit lives, and Ifrit can be a meanie face. So the way you get cards is actually through drops. They are rare drops from almost all enemies. Any enemy you can find in the overworld, I'm pretty sure has a card form. And there is also, and this is again telling, there's a card command. So Final Fantasy VIII lets you equip different commands. Arguably the most or least useful is card. And you get this on your first Guardian Force. What's a Quetzalcoatl? I believe. I'd have to double check, but I'm pretty sure it's on Quetzalcoatl. And you can get this very early. You can go down to the beach here and you can beat up, I want to say pufferfish. I haven't played this game in like 5 years, for a couple hours. And it's not even that, because this takes 100 ability points. And I think you can get like 6 or so down on the beach if you're lucky. They're the only things in the game that give like 2 each for a while. It depends on how you want to define that, I guess. There's harder enemies that give more, but most of those aren't until later. Excuse me. And you can go down to the beach right now and level up a little bit. But so you can get the card ability, and that has a chance. It's a Pokeball. You have a chance based on enemy health, among other things. Your level. It's definitely health and level. I don't think it takes your damage into account. Certain enemies are harder to capture than others, but you Pokeball Go enemies, and they will turn into cards for your collection. And in the starter area are a couple nice monsters that you can do this to. There are relatively high-level Tyrannosaurus Rexes, so if you're willing to save scum, you can wander around in the forest until a T-Rex pops out and try to card it. T-Rex is a really powerful card. I want to say there's like a wolf-like thing on the other side. This is a big dirt path. I want to say there's a wolf-like thing over here somewhere that you can turn into a decent card. Um, but those are really your two options for a while. Once you get a decent enough starter deck, you can start dueling people and getting rare cards, which we'll segue into in a little bit. Uh, once you have, a good enough deck, you can start. There's actually one more way to get cards. That is most Guardian Force bosses drop them as part of the drop for beating the boss. So when you go into Ifrit's Cavern here, I believe you get the Ifrit card upon beating Ifrit. There's a couple bosses or Guardian Forces, excuse me, where that's not the case because of how you get them. We're gonna start talking about Magic and other systems in Final Fantasy VIII here in a minute, but generally, when you beat a Guardian Force boss and get them, you get their card, I believe. But the main way you're going to get basically every good card in the game is to duel other players, which makes some degree of sense. But you'll notice I didn't say anything about booster packs, and that's because there aren't any. I don't think there's any way to buy cards in Final Fantasy VIII. You have to go out and get them, and the ways to go out and get them are to duel people who have cards, for which you need at least 5 cards to have a valid hand, or to go smack monsters around and card them. Delicious seltzer. All right. So let's talk about the main incentive for doing this, because the developers did not actually just assume people would want to play cards for the sake of playing cards, which you could argue is a bad assumption. I might, but I'm a weirdo who likes playing card games. But most people, I don't think, are weirdos who like playing card games. They're weirdos who like going outside and talking to girls. So the incentive structure for playing card games is wild. But first, we need to talk about Guardian Forces. So let's talk about Guardian Forces. Guardian Force. The other GF. So we get Guardian Forces throughout the game. Guardian Forces are summons, but they have a pretty big impact, on both the story, the game, and all the mechanics. Guardian Forces are one of the things you equip directly to your character, the other one actually being magic. I don't really want to talk about this, but I guess I have to. I said there was no traditional equipment in Final Fantasy VIII, which is legally true. You can modify your weapon into a different and better weapon, but I don't believe you get to equip any weapon you've already had on you. You're only modifying a weapon. So there's no equip screen to change out your I forget what the gun blades are called, like your double-barreled gun blade for Lionheart or something like that. You are stuck with Lionheart once you have it. Or you can downgrade, but that would be silly. But these are the two major things you can equip to your character. Guardian Forces have a couple differences from Magic. One is that there's only one copy of each Guardian Force, so there's only one Quetz, there's only one Shiva, there's only one Ifrit, there's only one Bahamut, he's way late, etc. Whereas every character can have a copy of, say, Fire. Right? But Guardian Forces inform the ability of the character, and many Guardian Forces have refinement type abilities. So I don't remember who has it. I don't remember who has the exact ability we're going to think about, but that doesn't really matter. We can still give an example here. So, like, I know Shiva has refine ice and water magic as one of her abilities. So you can use any character with Shiva and most, not even most, a lot of items, some items, you can use Shiva's abilities on to produce magic. So, like, there's a generic, I think it's called Magic Stone or something like that. You can use Refine Ice Magic on it to produce copies of Blizzard. So, Magic Stone, let's reverse that arrow. So, Magic Stone goes into Shiva, out of Shiva comes Blizzard. Right? That's easy enough. There is a few. I want to delete everything. There's a few other things where that is the case, and one of them are these items like Magic Stone. Specifically, I mentioned you could modify weapons and change how they work. And you can get modification materials out of one of your Guardian Forces. I think it's Diablos. I think. Doesn't really matter. What matters here is that you have the ability to do this. So, like, you can. You have the ability to do this, and the source material for doing this is actually Triple Triad cards. Right, so what you do is Triple Triad goes in to, I think it's Diablos. Out comes some item that's useful, like, I don't know, Metal Pipe. I don't remember what it's called, but there's an item that gives you the ability to then pop back into a different Guardian Force to refine, I think it's Cerberus, to refine double and triple, which are some of the best skills or best magic in the game. Yeah, I don't know what they're called. But basically you have not a self-fulfilling loop, but you can loop whatever you get back into this, or from this first process back into it to get magic. Or you can stop here and have material for modifying weapons. And this is actually something you can do to get Squall's ultimate weapon by the end of Disc 1 is playing the card game. It's also how there's an item called Holy War. And what a Holy War does is it casts an invulnerability. That's the worst W of my life. It casts a kind of invincibility on your party, but it's more accurate to say you're not affected by attacks, spells, and abilities, because it also stops you from buffing yourself, for one. But if you have the Gilgamesh card, you can refine it, and I think that's Bahamut, to get out 10 Holy Wars, which, as you can imagine, is a lot of invulnerability and is how the official Brady Games guide, recommended you kill the super boss, Omega Weapon. So these cards, I gotta remember what a lot of them give specifically. But they are very powerful if you have the knowledge and the right combination of stuff you can do. And it's, I think, an open question to me, at least, if the developers intended for you to do some of these combinations, or if they're like fun byproducts of knowing a system well enough to be able to exploit it, because that is kind of the skill in Final Fantasy VIII, is knowing the systems well enough to exploit them. But here's another example. So when you junction, which is the equipment, so we're going to talk about junctioning for a second. I gotta stop releasing my mouse button early. We're going to talk about junctioning for a second. So when you junction, you're equipping a magic to your character to enhance some part of that character's stats. A really common one to do early game is you put Cure on HP, and by common one I mean basically everyone who plays Final Fantasy VIII blind will do this, because A, it's obvious, but B, you'll get, I think it's like 600 extra health if you have 100 copies of Cure. You get extra HP for each copy of Cure on your health. So I think you get like 600 extra HP, which when you're talking about having 900 or 1500 is a lot. But maybe what the game doesn't tell you is once you have Siren, it's either Siren or Shiva, there are items available pretty early in the game that you can turn into Kira through that transmuting system, and you can put that in your health. And I think Kira gives 50, no, 30? No, that's Kiraga. It gives somewhere between 10 and 20. I'm going to say it's 15, but I'm not going to look that up. Because gives a lot of extra health. You put that on your health, suddenly you have, instead of 1500, you have 4000. And again, that's a big deal. But what if I told you that by playing Triple Triad, you could do things like get Kiraga, or if you're a baller, full life, which are even better. So I think Kiraga is 30 each. That sounds right, but you know, if we think about that, that's extra 3000 health. That's pretty good. If I want to say full life is 50 each, it might be. I want to say full life is 50 each. 50, not 15. So again, that's an extra 5000 health. And you can get these actually pretty early if you know how to play Triple Triad. Same with Triple. Triple is an extremely powerful skill for a variety of reasons. You want it on basically all of your characters. What it lets you do, and this is a, what is that? Earning. But what Triple lets you do is it lets you cast 3 spells on your turn, which is, again, pretty good. But it also lets you conjunction it, and it's pretty strong in basically every category. I remember being strong in particularly luck, but that's another thing to consider. And you can get copies of Triple way earlier than you're meant to if you play Triple Triad. Where do I go from here? Yeah. So the developers clearly intended you to play Triple Triad, but it's unclear to me if they like know the ramifications of their actions, I guess. Another really common one is if you can refine wind magic, which I think is off Quetzalcoatl, you can make float, which is you can cast it in battle to make yourself immune to earth magic because you're no longer on the ground. You're floating, as it were. You can actually use this to trivialize one of the bosses, and one of the Guardian Force bosses, brothers. But you can also put float on your speed stat with a couple of the Guardian Forces and suddenly be a lot faster. You might normally have a speed stat of like 60, and you can put float on it and get over. I'm pretty sure a float gives 1 each, but I don't remember. Haste is another common one. But you can junction all these to your stats, and you can get them early with Triple Triad. Oh, you know what? We have not talked about rules. So as another consequence to this game existing, so let's go back to our board here that we drew. And like, children would go, man, it's the worst tic-tac-toe board I've ever seen in my life. And I would say, you know what, child, you're right, because it's a Triple Triad board. But anyway, we haven't actually covered all the rules. Maybe that's good, maybe that's bad. Different regions will have different rules, and you can exploit this or you can get owned. It's really one or the other. So, like, one rule is open face. So each player has all of their cards open. That one could be sideways to the other player at all times. So you can try to plan maybe what your opponent's next move will be, or whatever. But there's also the closed face rule, where you have no idea what your opponent's cards actually are in their hand. Or I mentioned that there is a rule for how you take the cards from your opponent. And there's a couple. So, you know, let's say you have these 5 cards. One, I believe, is blind pick, where again you don't know what the card is, but you get to pick one of them. Whether that makes you happy or sad is depending on how lucky you are. One is definitely open pick, where you know exactly what card you're grabbing for your opponent, and hopefully it's a good one. One is all pick, which, you know, you win, and all these cards, that's the worst curly race of my life. All these cards your opponent has, that's not much better. But all these cards your opponents have, they are now yours. And that works in reverse. So if you lose a game and you didn't save recently, I hope you learned your lesson. Some cards also have elements. So, like, I know the Quetzalcoatl card has the lightning element. Shiva has ice. Ifrit has fire. That's terrible fire. Fire. Magic the Gathering, don't sue me. And sometimes the board will have elemental sigils on it. Some people will play the game so that these sigils will beat each other, even if the card values don't. So you can whip out your double A ice or whatever, and if your opponent has a 1/1/10 fire, I hope you have something that can beat out fire, because you just lost your ice card. Okay. There's also the Queen of Cards side quest, which she has a copy of every card in the game, if I remember correctly, and you can get cards you were missing. If you turn a card into, you know, radioactive magical goo, I don't think you can get it back that way, but if you lost a card and now you can't retrieve it for story reasons, I think she'll have a copy. But that really gets us into another thing about Final Fantasy VIII, which is that the developers had to plan around things like you not being able to get a copy of your card back. They also, how do I put this? Most cards, I think, if the Queen of Cards doesn't have them, are time limited. So if you, maybe I should have done some research to have more specific examples of this, but like the Headmaster has the Cipher card, and he is not available to play cards with for something like half of the game. The original version of Final Fantasy VIII has came on 4 discs, which sounds insane, but that's how we used to have to do it. He goes away sometime in the middle of disc 2, I want to say, so he's just not available for disc 3, and he is available on disc 4. So you're allowed to duel him for that much of the game to get your Cipher card, and he has good stuff. Your Cipher can be turned into good stuff. So the developers did have to account for that, or at least they thought about accounting for that. It's good that they accounted for that, because again, there's no way to buy cards. You must win them, or you must turn monsters into cards. That also raises the question of, like, what is a boss monster? How do you get their cards? And the answer is that people have them if they're vaguely related to that boss. Like, I know for a fact that there is, it's not exactly a quadrupedal robot spider, but that's what I'm gonna call it. There's a quadrupedal robot spider card, and it's like the second or third boss, depending on how you want to define bosses. You're supposed to run from it. I believe you can destroy it, but it's really dumb. But someone in an enemy nation who's like high up in the command ranks has a copy of that card later in the game. But I'm rambling a bit now, so let's go over like some stuff we've talked about. So one is that Triple Triad requires it has a dedicated button, and again, I cannot stress how weird I find this. There's not, some players are card players, and they will play cards with you if you talk to them using the normal talking routine. They have everyone has a dedicated card game deck and a dedicated button to do that. They had to think about how you would actually acquire the cards. maybe I should switch to like an actual. There is a text tool right here, but I'm gonna pretend I don't know that. Um, but anyway, they had to think about acquisition. So for some bosses, and some bosses, for a lot of the enemies in the game, how do you actually acquire their card? Um, and not even all of them are. Well, no, that's not a good enemy. So I know there's a card. I think it's one. It's either 1, 2, 3 A or A 1, 2, 3. It's a shitty card, but you get it from an alien invasion side quest. I'm not making that up. I think you have to feed him a certain amount of elixirs to get it. I don't remember what it refines into, but like, it's a terrible card. But you do have to acquire it somehow, and the developers made up little fun side quests for a lot of these. So a lot of them, you have to win almost all of the good cards. But some of them are just from boss battles. They are a drop. So like, I want to say in Final Fantasy VII, the boss. No, that's not right. Whatever. In Final Fantasy VII, you beat some bosses, they drop like an armor, they might drop a weapon. Actually, that's a good one. So like the first boss, the Guardian Scorpion, he drops a weapon for Barret, right? Final Fantasy VIII's equivalent of that is getting cards. You don't get prizes directly like you might in Final Fantasy VII, Final Fantasy VI, or any of the other ones. That like the card itself is your reward. If you want to play the card game or not, that was your reward. You can turn it into something else. That's good for you. But the card itself was your reward, along with maybe a Guardian Force. They did also have to think about how you would acquire against certain bosses because they made those cards for whatever reason. So that's going to include a friend, the Metal Spider, whose name I can't remember. To be fair to me, it has a name like A3GI5 Guardian Spider or something like that. And then also you can, not the guard ability, the card ability. You can also use the card ability on wild monsters to get more cards. We didn't really talk about rules a whole bunch, but they did have regional rules. And one fun thing about this is the rules will actually follow you around if you play with them, and you'll learn them. So like, you can introduce the rule that if you win, I get to keep all of your cards to people who don't play with that rule, and they might go along with it. And that is the worst like business proposition I've ever been offered in my life. Like, why would I agree to do that? If I'm playing you and you're the protagonist, why would I agree to give you all my cards? You know. But then again, the big design implication from all this is the refinement, which is what the class of Guardian Force abilities are that let you turn stuff into other stuff. Because again, you can get Squall / Leon's ultimate weapon in Disc 1. The way that weapon modification works is a little weird, but you can get it in Disc 1, and you get a lot of it through the card game. Almost all of it, I'm pretty sure. And you get a lot of the magic you're going to use in Final Fantasy VIII through refinement as well. Yeah, we can talk about that. So magic in Final Fantasy VIII is not renewable. There is no, or not immediately renewable, I should say. I'm going to take some drink of seltzer because I've been talking for a little bit. So magic in Final Fantasy VIII is not immediately renewable. You think about, let's compare it just to Final Fantasy VII because that's actually a good game, where you have, you have your materia, and maybe you have your little green materia, and your green materia is the thunder materia, and it's your best friend. Uh, oh, let's actually keep talking about that for a little bit. But you have your thunder materia, and you can give it to Cloud. You can give it to Barrett. I don't know why that's Barrett's head shape. You can give it to Tifa, whose hair looks kind of like this. The fish, but whatever. You can pass this thing around. That's fine. But notably, you can't run out of thunder if you have a thunder materia. As long as your character has mana or MP, you can keep casting thunder. That is just not true in Final Fantasy VIII. So you have up to 100 copies of any given spell on your character at a time. So maybe you have 100 copies of thunder. That's it. You can. Oh, okay. Let's just keep talking about that. So you have your 100 copies of thunder. Maybe you have 80 copies of blizzard. I'm just gonna leave this blizz. You have your 40 copies of cure. After some boss fight, say. The way you're going to get that back the quickest is to refine more copies of those spells. So maybe you use, I think it's Siren for Restore Magic, and you convert, I don't know, 3 copies of Healing Herb. I think potions actually refine directly into cure. You refine your potions into more cure spells, and you leave yourself out on Blizzard. That is the main way you're going to get spells back in Final Fantasy VIII. There's 2 other ways you can get spells back, and they both involve the ability draw, something I can't do very well with a mouse. And what draw does is all enemies have a pool of possible spells that you can pull from them, and they don't run out. So like let's say I'm your enemy. So we'll draw a little me here. Let's see, give me the hood. Yep. And you know what? I just don't have legs. So I'm your enemy. And I have some spiky head hair that's a bad hair day, but we'll deal with it. I'm your enemy. Maybe in the context of Final Fantasy VIII, you can draw double death and I don't know, aura or something. This would actually be an incredible enemy to draw from. I've made myself way OP. What we can do if you're Squall, and I'm only going to draw Squall's stupid gunblade here, but kind of looks like a one of those bird cartoons. Bird on YouTube. Check them out. But anyway, if Squall has less than 100 copies of any of these spells, you can use the draw ability to get those back into Squall's inventory. And I forget exactly how the number on that works. I want to say you're guaranteed at least 1 copy, and you can get up to 20. I don't remember if it's based on your magic stat or luck stat or what. It is based part on spell strength, so like these would be hard to get copies of. Especially if I was like a mini boss or something, you might want to draw more spells out of me, but that might be difficult. But that's the other main way you can restock your spells is through enemies withdrawing. There's also these little points in the world, and they're literally called draw points, where they're basically magic welling up from the ground. So they look kind of like this, and the particles will float upward. You can find those. Some of them are hidden, which is very good. And once you draw from them, they turn blue and kind of sparse. I'll let you know they're empty if you find them again. Oops. But these are extremely non-renewable sources. You will find them. You might draw from them a couple times if you're playing the game, quote unquote, normally. But you're not going to stick around and draw more out of it. I don't even remember how they refill, to be honest. I think it's a number of think it's like time in combat or something. But you can't just sit around and wait for them to refill. That doesn't work. So refinement is how you're going to get most of your spells. I know I keep saying that, but that's because it's true. Not only is refinement how you're going to get most of your spells, it's how you get most of your good ones. And there's also higher magic refinement. So like, I shouldn't have deleted that. One thing you can do with refinement is like you can turn, I think it's 10 copies of Thunder into 1 copy of Thundara, which maybe individually aren't as good in enhancing whatever stat as 1 copy of Thunder, but if you're full on copies of Thunder, you can start using Thundara and maybe try to do that. You don't get a copy of higher magic refinement until, I want to say just 2, but that is another option. But I think one of the main things I wanted to get out with talking for, holy shit, it's been 46 minutes, about Triple Triad is refinement being the primary source of magic means it has to be at least a little renewable. And I don't know how Triple Triad started, like as a concept of the Final Fantasy VIII, but I feel like the developers thought they needed some way to make refinement more renewable and less, how do I put this? Drastic isn't the right word, but some way of making refinement continue to work. Because once you run out of potions and cure spells, what do? The answer is plan better, but also you have other options, like you can turn other things to cure. You can turn other things into cure. If you run out of the high level cures, you can refine cure into higher level cures, which is more useful. But I think the answer the developers eventually settled on was you have your card. You have God knows how many cards, especially if you're playing with some of the grabbier rule sets where you grab all of someone's hand at the end of the match. And if you have, 13 copies of, I don't know, Garuda, and Garuda turns into, I don't even think that's a card in Final Fantasy VIII. You have 13 copies of some bird, and the bird turns into, I don't know, 10 copies of, I think it's literally called Big Fan. Don't ask me what that F is. I don't know. But I think it's literally called Big Fan. And then each Big Fan turns into, I want to say it's 5 copies of Tornado. Tornado. You can restock your win magic really quickly, is the point here. Where one of these turns into 10 of these, turns into 5 of those. That's 50 copies per card. And you can get a lot more magic that way. There's probably other stuff we could talk about if I had done more preparation on this. And but again, the prompt was give a talk for 30 minutes without preparing. But like we could ask what other things could that button be used for? And then like we could ask ourselves, what did Final Fantasy X do with it? What did Final Fantasy IX do with it? Not 14. We wouldn't talk about 14. There is also the question of if Triple Triad, to me, if someone can find a dev interview for this or just a Google search result, I'll look at it. But like, how much did a lack of equipment in the traditional sense inform the need for this kind of reward structure from Triple Triad, and how much is the other way around, where they're like, okay, we don't really want players to have equipment exactly. We're going to give them the junction command to, boost their stats. How do we let them get magic? Because I'll also tell you right now, not only is drawing magic from an enemy potentially dangerous, it's also really boring. There's very little choice in what you're doing. There is a boss kind of late in the game that's it's a big witch, and we're gonna draw her like a gingerbread man. An angry gingerbread man. But she's a big witch. And she has either Cure or Kira. I think it's Kira. And she also has one of your party members, quote unquote, junctioned to her. So like we got a Jesus metaphor going on here. You can draw Kira from the boss, and then drawing also lets you cast immediately if you don't want to stock it. This is technically worse for a couple reasons, but know that you can cast a spell instead of stockpiling it. But you can use this Kira to heal, your 3 dudes, and the intent, it pretty clearly is to heal the party member that the boss has junctioned to her. This is so boring. You can stockpile as much of the spell as you want. Well, okay, you can stockpile 300 copies while you're healing yourself and the boss, but it's not engaging. You're not making choices. She slaps the Squall. That's, maybe we draw a comically oversized hand for that. She slaps Squall or whatever, and he gets down to at 100 health. You just either have him heal himself, or you have someone else draw and heal themselves. And you do have draw equipped on one of your guys. It's a necessary skill to have equipped. I think I might do better prep and then be prepared to talk about this on stream or something. But that's some of the ways that Triple Triad informed the rest of the design of Final Fantasy VIII. I'm pretty sure it's also a card game of Final Fantasy XIV, but I will never touch Final Fantasy XIV, quite frankly. If you made it this far into the video, holy shit, 52 minutes. I appreciate you. And hopefully I will see you next stream.